In this module, we will see radicalization, concept and approaches. Deradicalization. Deradicalization refers to the programs that are generally focusing on radicalized individuals or groups of suspected or convicted terrorists with the aim of rehabilitating them and reintegrating them into society, or at least dissuading them from further use of political violence. It seeks to prevent members from non-radicalized population from being radicalized without the use of heavy-handed coercive or repressive means, as these are thought to be possible counterproductive. So, following the proposal of John Horgan, counter-radicalization defined by United Nations Counterterrorism Intelligence Task Force, policies and programs aimed at addressing some of the conditions that may propel some individuals down to the path to terrorism. It is used broadly to refer to a package of social, political, legal, educational, and economic programs specifically designed to deter dissatisfied and possibly already radicalized individuals from crossing the line and becoming terrorists. The main focus of counter-radicalization efforts is therefore not the terrorists themselves, but rather the strengthening and empowering of the community from which they might emerge and which might, if neglected, be deemed potentially to support them. So basically, in case of counter de-radicalization, there can be two possible approach. First is to identify and target the youth which are already being radicalized, where there has to be individual specific program, which we have seen in case of Maharashtra and Kerala and Jammu and Kashmir. These states have followed such kind of policies where they have specifically identified individual, and they have taken specific measures to de-radicalize them or disengage them from committing any further act of violence. Whereas the other approach can be identifying the community and try to engage or try to undo the certain kind of reasons which are creating fertile ground for recruitment of radicalization. So, advocate of counter-radicalization program in relation to violent Islamism proposes steps like the following: expand focus from violent to non-violent extremist. So basically, the approach is that in a way, if the individual has been already recruited or have been indoctrinated, uh, so rather than constantly highlighting their activities, the uh, approach could be that the to highlight or to underline the kind of areas or sites within that particular society where there can be cohesive atmosphere which can be created. Empowering mainstream Muslims voices, so basically giving more emphasis on the moderate section of that particular society, which can create a possible uh, elements of reconciliation within the society which is marginalized and mainstream society. Addresses local grievances and not the global ones. So very often we can see in all these cases the individuals are being radicalized with the idea of perceived injustice which is happening at the global level. So in such kind of thing, the local agencies or law enforcement agencies or the entities which are trying to address these issues, they need to constantly draw their focus to local grievances and need to address those grievances which can which can rationalize this particular individual in order to get away from the perceived idea of injustice. Or and the next approach could be regenerating efforts to promote prosperity, reforms, and democracy in Arab countries. To a certain extent, in case of global perceived injustice, the main source constantly has been the Arab countries and the kind of injustice or the constant, constant instability in that particular region, or the condition of civil war in different countries, which has remained for longer period of time region of global perceived injustice for particularly to the community of Muslim population. So if we try to address this particular issue, then it can create that kind of disconnect between the global idea of perceived injustice and the local grievances which all these communities might be facing in different regions, portraying the Al Qaeda threats realistically and emphasize the group's bankrupt ideology. So basically, in several countries, we can see that the Al Qaeda's aims, objectives are very overemphasized. So we can see that all these countries can portray Al Qaeda in its Al Qaeda's threat in realistic manner, and it can logically convince or create a kind of counter narrative which can which can elaborate that how Al Qaeda's ideology do not have any long term or logical end. Rather than creating a constant destructive ideas, it cannot create any kind of, it cannot contribute constructively for the benefit of a particular community, employing employing nuanced and non-combative rhetoric every time rather than creating the division between us versus them and creating a constant narrative for a war or more aggressive action. The employment of nuance and non-combative, or the rather than midway for such kind of narratives can be more helpful in case of addressing these kind of issues, challenging extremists in cyberspace, especially in the recent time period, which has been observed that the social media was constantly used to recruit or indoctrinate individuals. Then there has to be measure to challenge this particular extremist in cyberspace itself, and broadening the Muslim outreach. So all these specific measures can help creating a kind of faith within different individuals regarding the different political environment or political governance setup where they are located. So the objectives of counter radicalization in terms of three opposing core dynamic of radicalization, that is first grievances, ideology and mobilization. So in order to counter grievance, if the violent extremists aim to exploit grievances, real or perceived, one of the core objective of the counter radicalization is to address these grievances or the perception thereof. So basically, if the as in case of the uh, Arab region being constant source of perceived idea of non injustice being done with the Muslim community, there has to be clear and groundly rooted narrative which will portray Arab problem as the problem of political transformation of a particular society rather than being a problem of a particular political ideology or persecution of a particular community. Second, the counter ideology. If violent extremism seeks to promote extremist narrative and can make their ideology resonate, the purpose of counter radicalization is to expose and counter such ideas, educate communities, and thereby strengthening their defense against the extremist narrative, and empower community leaders to speak out against violent extremists and their ideas. So basically, as we can see that several of these recruiters use Islam as an ideology in order to indoctrinate or pursue certain individuals in order to achieve justice or their uh, true goal in case of Islam. Then there has to be counter narrative which can help these individuals to understand that what is happening in the name of Islam is actually serving only a limited community or serving the interest of the smaller section rather than trying to achieve a larger goal for the humanity. Counter mobilization, which is the third element, if violent extremism attempts to form cells and recruit followers, the objective of counter radicalization is to help communities build networks, knowledge, and tools that can be used to challenge and resist such attempts. So basically, uh, in order to prevent such kind of mobilization, what is essential is the strong network within particular community which can identify if there is any kind of sense of alienation among such individuals who can become potential recruits for such kind of radical elements. So Lorenzo Vedino formulated some advice for the problem of US and Europe, which can provide a significant insight in order to understand the problem of in order to understand the problem of radicalization and develop a model of de-radicalization for Asia and South Asia. The recommendations he has made is: first, know your client. That is, no counter radicalization program can be effective without a deep knowledge of a targeted community and the process that leads some leads some into a radicalize. So basically here we need to understand that the marginal communities or ethnically dissatisfied communities, there can be issues which need to be addressed, whether their developmental aspirations are not fulfilled, whether they are not getting sufficient political representation, or their political aspirations are not fulfilled. Then one has to know such kind of ground level realities before addressing these or targeting these communities for counter radicalization. Second is be flexible. No single approach will work in all cases and everywhere. And in many cases, no solution at all will work. What sways one individual might leave another unfazed. So basically, as the region or as the case will arise, the law enforcement agencies as well as the state or governing authorities in this particular region need to take specific program. For example, if we take example from Indian context, we can see that the approach to deal with the uh, political instability in the region of Punjab was not similar in case of Jammu and Kashmir or the region of Northeast. Every time we have to see that what is the local situation, what are the what are the factors which are shaping the discontent in that particular region, and what are the external factors which are fueling constantly this discontent, and then one has to take specific approach in order to understand or in order to address such kind of issues. Whereas we can see that all these scenarios might not be helpful in case of any kind of extremism which will arise in northern India or southern India. There the law enforcement agencies as well as state have to take different kind of approach. Then one has to set a clear matrix. It is the imperative for a program to establish from day one what it seeks to achieve. So basically, when any particular agency is trying to develop a kind of program for de-radicalization, there has to be very clear cut goal that what they want to achieve from this particular program. So in this case, if we try to take example of this particular module where the clear objective is to address the educational institution and uh, academic community to disseminate knowledge. So here the clear focus is on the concept and approaches or the different models of radicalization. So in particular, the program must determine whether it seeks to target simply violent individual or more broadly the intellectual framework of radicalization that might or might not give rise to violent behavior. Then the state or local authorities need to take approach where they will be choosing many partners rather than relying on only one section or one faction of society. They has to constantly look on multiple actors in order to reach out to these particular individuals or group. Yet, given its fragmentation and lack of unified leadership, finding partners in is not at all easy in certain circumstances, where very often we can see that the government had to take the ad hoc approach on several occasions. Work at the local level. Europeans have learned this particular insight can be learned from Europe's experience, where their central governments used to issue different guidelines and fund, but the actual ground level agencies decide that what kind of radicalization program they need to execute. So they get the flexibility that what kind of approach they need to take. Play down counter Play down counterterrorism. So the security forces need to give uh, their autonomy while dealing with these kind of issues, but their visibility has to be minimal. then be open. So consult with academics, civil liberty organization, anybody, and anybody with expertise. If the inform the public, get the feedback from the Muslim community, which will give a kind of constant feedback or the idea of introspection of a particular program, where there can be course correction at the frequent duration, and which can help the program to sustain for relatively longer period of time. Find ways to evaluate success and failure. Finding ways to empirically measure the result of any particular program, which can help to make the program more efficient. Have a thin skin, have a thick skin. So in such counter-terrorism operations, there can be several occasions where there can be undue criticism or there can be legitimate criticism. So the agencies which are involved in such kind of counter-terrorism or counter-radicalization activities, they need to make sure that they need to execute, and there can be a sense of or element of criticism which will be present constantly. So the immediate critic will include Islamist, conservatives, and civil libertarians. Policymakers must keep in mind that despite all the mistakes they are bound to make and the setbacks they will experience, a counter radicalization program is a necessary component of a comprehensive counterterrorism strategy. While many of the counter radicalization activities are very context specific, there are two policy choices that have been made wherever authorities engage in such policies of prevention and counter radicalization. First, which partners in the local community do you choose for collaboration? And the second, what objective one should aim for? For example, as said in the beginning, first approach can be identifying particular individual and then de-radicalizing them. The second could be addressing a particular community and making sure that the community will develop a kind of cohesive bond where the possibility of alienation or radicalization of a particular individual will become more and more difficult. Thank you.